to talk about the HEAL Act, which is another bill where, there's unfortunately unions on the wrong side of this issue. So Carrie, thank you so much for joining us. If you could tell us a little bit about the bill, its ramifications, what Community Service Society has concluded about it, and how that might be related to what we've been talking about with this dynamic on the New York Health Act and the resistance from public sector unions.
Sure. Jeff, actually, Elisabeth was able to join us. I wasn't sure if she was going to make it.
Oh, great.
So I thought she should do a much better job than me. she's
either or is great. We're happy. Elisabeth, would you rather speak?
I'm happy to go, but I'm also I disagree with the characterization of I would do necessarily a better job than Carrie, because she's, even actually, I think more eloquent than me, but I'm willing to start. And then if Carrie wants to chime in, would that be okay, Jeff?
Sounds great. Thank you.
So first of all, I just want to quickly say thank you all for having Carrie and I come today. The Community Service Society of New York is your state consumer assistance program. In other words, if you have a problem with health insurance, or if you want to enroll in health insurance, or if an insurance company denies you healthcare, we're here for you. And we do that through live answer helplines, as well as with a partnership of about 50 community-based organizations throughout the state of New York. And so we have in-person assistance in all 62 counties, and then live answer helplines for people that maybe can't get away from work to go to an office or something like that. Altogether, we see around over 100,000 New York health insurance consumers every year. And for people that don't have health insurance, we help them access low cost or free care. So that's who we are. And it's also sort of why we feel we have the right to even opine on this bill. The bill is supported, quite frankly, by two amazing progressive legislators, are their chief sponsors, as well as unions that we're really, frankly, used to being in partnership with. But unfortunately, we feel compelled to disagree with both the members as well as the unions that are really the proponents of this bill. And let me explain why. The unions in this case were very frustrated because they run their own health insurance companies, if you will, for their members. And so the unions in this case, as they would say, are representing the interests of their members. We totally agree with that. And they were finding that, for example, New York Presbyterian was charging astronomical prices for a maternity care program that they could get for, with no cost sharing at Mount Sinai. And so they wanted to be able to steer their members to that special program at Mount Sinai that had both better quality indicators and they could negotiate the rate cheaper. And, that's a really compelling story to tell. But the problem is this bill would change the insurance rules for everybody who's insured in New York State, specifically 13 million of us. And the other 13 million less, whatever, the 120,000 people that are in the 32BJ health insurance program do not necessarily have beneficent employers that are willing to go to bat for us when we are trying to get access to healthcare. And so that means that the result of this bill, and I'm not doing the best job of explaining it, doesn't really affect all of us in the same way, because not all of us have a union that's going to bat for us. And so while the union may be very responsive to their memberships, maybe our employers are not so much. And certainly insurance companies, as everyone on this call knows, are routinely not responsive to patients. So I could do a couple of things. What the bill does in short is that it basically says that when it basically says that hospitals are not allowed to make certain demands when they negotiate with insurance companies about whether to be in network or not. But what it does is it says it basically promotes the situation where a hospital would not be able to say, if you're having New York Presbyterian in your network at the Weil Center, all the doctors and all the labs and all the radiologists have to be in your network. So how does that translate to a patient? To a patient, you go in through the emergency room. If this bill were in effect, the emergency room might be in network, but the anesthesiologist wouldn't be in network. The surgeon wouldn't be in network. The radiologist wouldn't be network, or the lab wouldn't be in network, or some configuration of all that. That doesn't work for patients. And we know that because we're answering the phone every single day, helping people appeal their surprise bills and whatnot. So the other thing it does is that it encourages networks where you only have New York Presbyterian, for example, in Queens, but not the Weil or the Allen Pavilion in network. The other thing it does is it encourages tiered networks where you might be able to, they say, for example, Memorial Sloan Kettering is in network, but in fact, if you choose to go to Memorial Sloan Kettering, you will have to spend $1,000 copay every time you see a doctor, as opposed to going to perhaps St. John's Episcopal out in the Rockaways, where they might give you free copays. But those tiers end up becoming sort of sand traps for patients. So every one of the provisions of this bill, except for one or two, end up sort of doing what insurance companies want. They want it to be harder and for patients to actually access care. They want more of these intricate rules. They're counting on patients not being able to read the fine print of their insurance contract. And why might that be? How many of you on this call have ever received a copy of your insurance contract? I'm sure the answer is actually zero, because they don't actually send you your insurance contracts anymore. They make you go onto a website and log in and set up a password. And then you have to dig around that website to actually find what the rules are for your insurance company. Another way to kind of deter your ability to correctly and effectively access care. So I'm going to stop there. I actually have a chart that walks through every single provision of this bill, which I'm happy to bore you all with, but that's sort of it in a nutshell. And yes, this is the HEAL bill, which is Senate 7199. Assembly Bill number 8169. And I'll put that in the chat somebody already did. Thank you, Carrie. Forgive me if I'm talking to inside pool, but I'm going to stop there and see if there's any, or Carrie, do you have anything to add to it? I guess the last thing I would say is this is a group that, as I understand it, as is CSS, we want no insurance rules, right? We want the New York Health Act. We want just to be able to go to doctors and the hospitals we want to go to directly. We don't want to have more rules. And what this bill does is sets up more rules, more sand traps for patients. And that's just the bottom line. And we've met repeatedly with 32BJ. We've met repeatedly with the bill sponsors. They're quite cross with us. We're doing it at our own peril, right? They're quite cross with us. They're denouncing us. They're going to our bosses, complaining about this. They're trying to pick off our allies. They're good union organizers. I give them credit for it. But, we have to do what's right for people. And you either stand for something or you fall for everything, as Alexander Hamilton said, right? And so even though it would be easier for us just to go along with 32BJ and the unions that are sponsoring this bill, we feel we have to say, no, this is definitely going in the wrong direction, away from the New York Health Act, not for. And it's extremely disconcerting that some of our most progressive members have become co-sponsors for this bill. They're also the same co-sponsors of the New York Health Act. And we just don't understand, just because a union sponsors has a good idea, the good idea for them acting as an insurance company for their members doesn't mean it's good for all of us who really are trying to get away from insurance bureaucracy, not embrace it.
Thank you, Elisabeth. Before we get to questions, Carrie, do you want to add anything to that?
No, that was very complete.
Okay, so please put your hand up if you want to ask a question. I have one to start, and this just feeds right into what you were talking about, Elisabeth. okay, for a group of people here who have been working, for various lengths of time, many of us for years on the New York Health Act, some of us, at least the campaign, the bill's been around for 30 years, for many years, and just this achingly slow process of making a little bit of progress every year. And then honestly, this year, falling back maybe for the first time in many years, like regressing on this bill. So it's just bewildering to me, coming from that world as an activist, to have heard for the very first time about a bill a few weeks ago, and I'm pretty up on stuff going on with healthcare bills and advocacy in the state, to have just heard about this bill, and now it's like it might get past this session, and without any of the public scrutiny or the public hearings or all of the input process that has gone into the New York Health Act for many, many years. So how does that happen? Like, how do we get to that point with a bill like this? So
Follow the money.
Okay, so
sorry, before we get to your question, Peter, that was a question for either Elisabeth or Carrie. Like, how did we get to this point so quickly with this bill?
It's an election year. They're this union is extremely smart, savvy union organizers. I mean, they've attacked me personally repeatedly. They've gotten members of the assembly to call up screaming at me. I mean, they're very powerful. And I'm shocked because 32BJ and my organization have done many reports together. We help 32BJ members all the time when they have problems with their health insurance companies. I am, we've done press conferences with 32BJ on New York Presbyterian's medical debt collection actions. We've done press conferences with 32BJ and various coalitions, opposing the creation of megapolis of Northwell on the Upper East Side on top of Lenox Hill. I don't know. I think they really, I honestly, when I was a little naive last fall, I actually thought they just hadn't read their bill, that they were union organizers and they just didn't understand. They just couldn't understand what their bill does, but they do, and they believe it. And I guess reasonable people can disagree, but the end of the day, this bill is a step away from the New York Health Act, not for. What the New York Health Act stands for is less insurance bureaucracy, less rules and sand traps and pitfalls that people who haven't read the fine print fall into, accessing doctors that you need, accessing, you as a patient and you and your doctors know what's best for your care, not some insurance company bureaucrat. That's what the New York Health Act stands for. And that is not what this bill does. This bill makes it harder to use health insurance, and it will engender more medical debt and more people being stuck with bills because they didn't understand what a tiered network was, or that the lab department at their hospital was somehow carved out of their benefit package. I mean, that is just not going to work for patients, and especially people who have limited English proficiency or limited literacy. Maybe
you're in the picture. Please go ahead.
Maybe are English speakers, but have limited health or insurance literacy. So that's the reality of this bill. And I don't understand why 32BJ is doing this, except that they're madder than hell at New York Presbyterian, and I guess this is their way of getting back at them. But I think New York Presbyterian charges too much too, by the way. But I don't think this is the way to do it. There are real ways to control hospital costs, and other states have done it. Maryland has a global payment system. We used to have the New York prospective hospital reimbursement methodology. We set hospital rates so that all payers paid the same amount, roughly, more or less. And that was a fairer system. When we got rid of that, we've seen a quarter of our hospitals close in the last 20 years because we don't regulate our hospital reimbursement system. All of those are mechanisms. Other states are doing, cost and quality payment commissions. We're not talking, we have no conversation about healthcare affordability in New York State, except whether we empower the insurance companies versus the hospitals, or the hospitals versus the insurance companies. But guess what? When two elephants dance, as Ursula would say, the grass gets trampled, and we patients are the grass.
Thank you so much. And just to add one thing, maybe you're being diplomatic, you didn't mention, but I've heard that it was literally one of the top insurance industry lobbyists who wrote this bill. So if you want to know where it's coming from, the language of it, that's where
I actually like him very much. You know, obviously I'm on either side of the table with him for 30 years now. His name's Harold Islin. He's the lawyer for the Health Plan Association. He's a terrific guy. He's a great, legal mind. And if you read the bill, it has, as Assembly Member Godfrey quipped to me, it has three divisions of negatives. It's like no insurance, no hospital shall enter into an insurance contract that shall not do la 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 la. Like it's a triple negative. And the reason why the bill's written that way is that so no one will understand it. And that's why Harold's a good guy and why he gets paid great amount of money. He does his job very well, and I have full respect for him. We've asked them to amend the bills to only cover people that are in collective bargaining units, because, on the theory that maybe health and, if the unions really want this bill for themselves and their members, I guess they're more democratic. But then maybe, if you have an employee with an employer who may or may not have your best interest at heart when they're picking the insurance company that for your year, they might just pick the cheapest one, right? So
I just was going to add the question why it took so long, why you hadn't heard about it before now, was that, we saw this at the beginning of the year that this legislation would do this, and we immediately contacted them and talked through. And so all this time, instead of going out and kind of talking about it, we've been, we asked them to make some changes and we talked about amendments. And so we were trying in good faith to not make a big deal about this, and give them a chance to fix it. And that's why it's come down to sort of the wire before it really got publicized.
Thank you, Carrie. Okay, let's go to some questions from our guests. So Peter.
Hi, Elizabeth. This is Peter Cook. We've talked before about this.
Hey, Peter, sorry, you have to hear me again.
Yeah, well, I think we concluded after talking to you that we supported you on medical debt, which we think is important. We're adamant about the New York Health Act, and we really concluded that this HEAL is not going to hurt efforts to pass the New York Health Act. And so I think we're really strongly supporting it. And I just tripped into this call from my friend Mary Thorpe, who told me that our email about this went out. So I decided to get on the call, and I also invited Alex Wiesendinger to come in and join us. And I was wondering if maybe we could let Alex from 32BJ at least respond to some of these things, just so we could all have this elucidated a little bit for our group here. I love what NIPAN does. I really respect all of you, but I do think it gets a little complicated, and it would be helpful to hear the other side here.
Sure, Alex, do you want to take that up?
I'm not sure. It doesn't, but it's nice to see you all. I haven't met most of you. My name's Alex Tyndall Wiesendanger. Peter asked me to join this call at 7:20 tonight. I'm the campaign coordinator for 32BJ and the Coalition for Affordable Hospitals. Full disclosure, in my personal life, I'm also on the board of the Council of Churches, and therefore lobby in favor of the New York Health Act. Elisabeth made a lot of points. We have certainly had these conversations back and forth. I would echo much of what you said, right? Like, we are organizations that generally are aligned and share a lot of the same values. 32BJ is a supporter of the New York Health Act. I would just offer a couple points from our perspective. Our coalition is mostly unions and also some patients advocates groups and, and some other organizations, very deeply concerned at the heart of it with the cost of healthcare and seeing that the driver of that is large private hospital systems and the prices that they charge. Oh, sorry, Susan, 32BJ is the Union of Building Service Workers. So our members are the residential doormen and porters and janitors, the commercial cleaners, the security guards and school janitors and airport workers. I will say that our members, start at $30,000 a year and are obviously overwhelmingly people of color and immigrants, and have fought for a long time to win fully employer-paid healthcare. It is the thing that allows our members to still kind of live in New York, and see that threatened every time they're at the bargaining table. 175,000 members, not all of them in New York, about 85,000 members in New York, 200,000 covered lives. So deeply concerned about the cost and the way that hospital pricing is driving the cost. While Harold is Harold is a person, he's a lobbyist and a lawyer. Unfortunately, we could get hospital lobbyists to write this bill. They wouldn't. But this bill was written 100% for the 32BJ Health Fund. It is modeled on national legislation from the National Academy on State Health Policy, and a number of attorneys general and other state legislatures have recognized that a bunch of the contract terms that big, private, powerful hospital systems use are bad. They drive up costs, they're bad for patients, and they endanger our members' health care. We actually see this as a fairly small bill. We don't think it's a weird position as the person facilitating a coalition to be talking about your bill is not that big a deal, but we think all it does is removes a couple very anti-competitive, very unfair provisions that big hospital chains can force on workers' health plans. We have been back and forth on this, obviously, with our friends at CSS. We just have a fundamental disagreement about what this bill does and how much. We've spent a lot of time with national experts. Gustavo Rivera, who is the champion of the Health Act, is a co-sponsor of the bill. We do not see these as contradictory. In fact, it was one of the first sort of FAQs we did. And for our campaign, overall, which is about hospital pricing, no matter who is paying the bills, if we don't get the rates that private hospitals charge under control, it's bad for everyone. And these hospitals, the New York Health Foundation did a fantastic study on this a little while ago. The prices that hospitals charge have nothing to do with quality or anything other than their market power. So, it was our hope that we could find some common ground on this. We have been trying to make some of those amendments to clarify some of the specific issues that we thought were really valuable. We just fundamentally disagree about a few of the others, and we just don't think that big profit-driven, even if they're nonprofit, hospital networks should have sort of limitless power to decide what happens to people either, and it's a balance of what a health plan like ours can do.
Thank you, Alex. I think we all agree on that point. You have a question from the chat that I want to read for everyone. Could you speak to what Elisabeth raised regarding fragmentation within hospital systems and how that might impact patients, particularly patients not in unions?
Absolutely. That was so we sort of, and we were and are still doing an amendment to the bill to address something here. We think that the point about, like, when you go to a hospital, the doctors in that hospital should be in network is a really good one. And we're actually amending the bill to say that. What we don't think is fair is, I'm sure everyone here knows, probably a lot of you know better than me, is that consolidation has meant more and more in New York City, right? We have basically the 5 families. And saying that if you want, or if you need a hospital in one place, you have to take every hospital that system owns, even if some of them are ridiculously expensive or very low quality, with no ability to negotiate what that looks like. I mean, I grew up in the Bronx. You can't possibly have a network without Montefiore, right? Montefiore has total power in the Bronx. But they're also buying up a bunch of stuff in Westchester that maybe is not good. So we wanted to do an amendment that clarifies that anything in a physical hospital should be there. But that, you know, it just because you have the only hospital in one county, a health plan should not have to take every other hospital if it's bad. We want to try to find a balance between access and affordability, which for us is at the key.
Thank you, Alex. Elisabeth would like to respond to that point, and just want to try to wrap up this conversation by 8 o'clock, so in a few minutes.
Sure, I'll make it super short. We also have the Community Service Society also happens to be the biggest like Obamacare navigator or enroller in the state of New York. And we have many, many patients who think that they're getting New York Presbyterian, but when they find out, come to pass after they've enrolled in an insurance plan that says they have New York Presbyterian prominently listed, they only get New York Presbyterian downtown. Now that doesn't help them if they want all of the special, units that are up at the Wild, the Upper East Side of New York City, or if they live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. So it's really unfortunate because patients don't understand that, I don't think it's great that hospitals have become like huge systems, but the fact is neither the hospital billers nor individual patients understand that New York Presbyterian isn't New York Presbyterian isn't New York Presbyterian. And they're madder than hatters when they're only getting downtown and not Weil or the Allen Pavilion. And so it's just another one of these sand traps where a patient ends up at Weil or Allen thinking New York Presbyterian's in network, and come to pass, they end up with a $10,000 bill because it was out of network and only downtown was in network. And so the fact is, I wish people really were able to access their insurance contracts or their networks, but it is very difficult. I would say maybe 10, 20% at most of our patients are able to go on their health insurance plans, websites, get a username and a password, and then know how to look up all the networks. And frankly, the network information that are on these insurance websites are often like these clunky PDFs where you have to do Control F to find things. I mean, I can't tell you how hard insurance companies make it for you to be able to figure out who's in network and who's out of network. And that's why we had to have a federal No Surprises Act. That's why New York State did our own No Surprises Act, which CSS was very involved in passing 10 years ago. It's just too hard for people. And I can go through the chart that shows you every single provision of this bill, except for two, have little sand traps that make it easier for insurance companies to say, no, we're not paying that bill. That's what this bill does.
Thank you, Elisabeth. And if either you or Carrie could post that in the chat, the document, the comparison that you just mentioned,
Well,
that would be really helpful.
Carrie and I were texting each other. I'm like, how do we post it in the chat?
We don't
Yeah,
know.
just click on
the
in the chat, there's a file icon. If you click on that file icon, it'll allow you to upload something.
Okay, I'll work on that, Carrie. You can.
Thank you. And thank you all, Elisabeth and Carrie and Alex, for joining us tonight to talk about this bill. It seems to be moving at lightning speed, and it's really important for there to be a conversation about this now, while we have a few weeks left in the legislative session. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight and talking about this. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you for doing this. I did put.
Jeff, could I answer the question about safety net hospitals from the chat?
Sure, go ahead. Just try to make it brief.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I won't debate Elisabeth on the points. We have a chart with another column about our opinion, about her opinion. I won't do that, but I will say I've actually spoken to a couple safety net hospitals. We've never seen a safety net hospital that uses these provisions. In fact, most plans will actively try to steer people to safety net hospitals because they're much more affordable. And so we actually think this bill helps safety net hospitals, and we've tried to steer members to them and been blocked by these very contract terms. So I'll just say that about safety net and public hospitals where we want to steer members, and most people do because they offer great high value care.
Okay, thanks again, Alex, and thank you again all for joining us on this. So it's a little after 8 o'clock tonight. We normally try to end around 8, but if